It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Laurel Bestock, my colleague at the Joukowsky Institute for Archaeology here at Brown University. And I'm going to kick off by asking her, tell us a secret about your site.
About my site. Well, when I think about secrets at Abydos in Egypt, I think on two levels. There are very literally unburied things that nobody has seen for thousands of years, and coming upon these spaces often, not just artifacts, but
Spaces?
Architecture. You find underground rooms that are free and clear, and once you find the door, you can walk in. That feeling of discovery is...
So secret is a...
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, but Laurel, Indiana Jones, come on.
It's true, in a way. It is very Indiana Jones-esque. But there are also the secrets that are sort of buried in plain sight, if you will. And here I really think that when we think of the archaeology of Egypt as something separate, we do it a disservice. This is still a place that's being lived in. And when we remember to open ourselves to the continuity of practice in Egypt, it's a secret that's right in front of us. When I look at the villagers who live next to my site, themselves living in ancient buildings.
That's it's. I like that, the hidden and the visible, and both the archaeologist has to see. So it's called Abydos. Does that have a meaning in ancient?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Abydos is actually a Greek word, and there is a site in Greece named Abydos, and this is when the Greeks came to Egypt in the first millennium BC, they renamed many of the sites, the ancient sites, by terms that were familiar to them.
Do we know what it was called before?
Absolutely. The ancient Egyptian term is Abju, so the Greek name reflects the ancient Egyptian name.
And it means hawk of the sun or anything? No, guess not. All right.
No, but in fact, the modern name in Arabic of the site is also very interesting. Araba el-Madfuna in Arabic means Araba the buried. So the archaeology of the site is present even in the modern name.
So it's a big cemetery.
It is a big cemetery. It's much more than just a cemetery. It's a
Tell all. Yeah.
Sure. It's an incredibly complex site. It has settlement areas, more than one. It was a major urban center, but there are also smaller villages around, so we have where people live.
A city? It was a city?
Absolutely, it was a
I
city.
didn't realize that. Okay.
People tend to forget that ancient Egypt had cities.
I thought it's all about dead things. Yeah, okay. So we have a city.
No, we have people living there as well.
City?
City, very important temples there. It was one of the main sites for the worship of the god Osiris for much of Egyptian history, and that informed pilgrimage as well. So we have not only people who live there, it's also a place that people come to make offerings to the god Osiris.
Up and down the Nile they travel?
Up and down the Nile. It's the ideal of every dead person in Egypt to visit the site of Abydos, to link himself or herself to Osiris.
When they're alive, they go there, or
well,
their souls would.
It's a very good question. In fact, it's not something we can answer entirely. Certainly, live people did go, and they built monuments there. They dedicated stelae. But we have, for instance, many tomb paintings that show the pilgrimage of the dead body going to Abydos, and we don't know if that really happened or if it was an ideal.
How long has work been going on at the site? I mean, that's a pretty impressive map.
Yes, Abydos has in many ways never been lost. There are standing monuments, and they've been visited as long as ancient Egypt has been of interest to outsiders. Of course, never lost to the people who lived there continuously for 5,000 years. But Napoleon's expedition visited, absolutely. And archaeological work in the more modern sense has been going on since the middle of the 19th century, continuously until now.
Every year, or breaks for wars, or?
Yes, there have been breaks for wars, but they're more or less every year. And there are multiple projects working at Abydos. Brown's is only one of several American universities. There are German projects in Abydos.
Interesting. Does everyone get along?
Everyone does get along, yes. American and German House, we have parties sometimes over at German House. It's great fun.
Excellent. So where is Abydos exactly, and give us a sense of the landscape and what it's like to be there.
Absolutely. It's a magical landscape. It's really a wonderful place to be. Abydos is located on the west of the Nile. Okay. So the Nile Valley really cuts through the Sahara. And when you look at a map, you have desert, and then you have this little ribbon of green next to the water.
Gift of the Nile.
Absolutely, and it's a very apt statement that Herodotus made. And Abydos then is located really at the junction between the irrigated land, the cultivated land that is immediately adjacent to the Nile, and then what we call the low desert, this desert plain. And then right in the background of the site are these enormous cliffs that lead up to the Sahara properly.
So you have the river, the green, the desert.
and the cliffs. And we think this is actually very important to the way the site was utilized and how it was understood. These cliffs are really a staircase to the west, a staircase to the land of the dead. And for instance, the first kings of Egypt who are buried at Abydos were buried at the base of the cliffs, really in this place that can take
Right
them.
there between the dead and the living. So.
Absolutely.
Now, you're saying the first kings. Are you sure, or is this... Every archaeologist likes to think my site, number one, first, most important, biggest.
And you are right, there has been debate about where the first kings of Egypt, at least the kings of the first dynasty, where we actually situate historically the very moment when Egypt became a monarchy and a single country.
What year?
Is complicated.
When is that? We'll come back to dates, but...
Absolutely. This transition happens in about 3100 BC, is where we would put it now.
Okay.
But increasingly over the last few decades, because of work that has been done by archaeologists at Abydos, we are now very certain, in fact, that the actual royal burials of these kings are at Abydos.
And what's the name of the first king?
Well, again, who was the actual tipping point? Who was the first king? Who was the
Big
last
man
king just
and-
of
yeah,
Abydos, and then the
yeah.
first king of all Egypt? It's a bit of a transition period,
Okay.
but we would really put this at the reigns of King Narmer and King Aha.